The first question JHipster is going to ask you when creating a new application is, what kind of application do you want to generate? You have the choice between these two architecture styles, monolithic and microservices. In this lesson, we're going to take a look at what each of these are and when best to use them. So here I have the definition for a monolithic application from Wikipedia, and I'm not going to read off what's on screen here. You can read this on your own, but I'll just kind of quickly explain what I think a monolithic application is. So I don't know about you, but these are the types of applications that I've been building for almost 20 years now. Before we get too far though, I want you to take a big deep breath here. I'm here to tell you that there is nothing wrong with these types of applications. Please don't run out and start refactoring your monolithic applications because you keep hearing about microservices at every conference you visit. So again, monolithic applications are these ones that we're kind of used to building, right? We start from scratch. Maybe it's a Spring Boot app, and we generate our application based on the requirements that we need. And then we go through and we start to build out our data model. And this is going to contain the data model for our entire application. So it may have different things, like in our store, it may have like products, it may have orders, it may have customers, when really we can kind of think of these things as independent, whereas we're building them all in the same application. And that doesn't mean just the back end. Even in the example that we've built in this course, where we had a Angular front end and a Spring Boot back end, they still kind of lived underneath one hood. The database was there. Both kind of worked together. They were under one application. And that's where Mono comes from. Mono is one, it's kind of one for all type of application. And so that's what a monolithic is. And if you've done any development, I'm sure this is at some point most of what you have been working on till now. So again, here's the definition for microservices from Wikipedia. Again, I won't read verbatim what it is. I'll let you read it, and I'll kind of just talk through what I think microservices are. So what a microservices boils down to is it's something that can perform a single task or function very well and can live independent of the overall application. It's really hard to have 100 people or whatever number you want to throw in there working on one code base. But if you have different teams working on different tasks, products, or services, it becomes much easier. So you could have different services or teams that work on different platforms, if you will. So maybe we have a very good team here in our organization that writes very well in, say, like a Node.js and MongoDB type of style. So we could stand up one service for just that type of application in our microservices application. And we could have another service that's written in, say, Angular and hits a Spring Boot backend. Not just the ability to split this up into different languages is not really the greatest thing ever, but really being able to split teams up into an independent function and have those functions live in the greater good of a larger scale application. And so that's where really microservices comes in for me. Now that we know what microservices are, it's time to talk about when we should use them. After we complete this section, you're probably going to be a little fired up and about all the advantages that they bring to the table. But before we run off, we need to know, just like any tool or framework that's in our developer's toolbox, this isn't one that you're going to want to use all the time, or as we're going to find out, even begin with. So we're going to talk monolithic first approach. And Martin Fowler is one of the brilliant minds in the software development community. And I'm going to link to this article that he wrote about microservices and some of the observations that he had. And I just want to talk through them real quick. So he writes, as I hear stories about teams using a microservices architecture, I've noticed a common pattern. 1. Almost all successful microservice stories have started with a monolith that got too big and was broken up. 2. almost all cases where I've heard of a system that was built as a microservice system from scratch, it has ended up in serious trouble. So the moral of this story is don't just think that you need to start a new application as a microservices. In fact, it starts better as a monolithic app that grows into a big headache for you and your team, where you realize that this can be separated into microservices and managed as a microservice, so you can split your teams up into different functions or tasks or services. So again, I'm going to link to this article. I suggest reading through it. It's a really good one. But it also talks to what we're going to do in this course. And we have told you that we're building out a real-world application from scratch later on in this course. So we're not going to start with a microservice because that's not what we're supposed to do here. We're starting with our monolithic approach. And if we ever get to a point one day where we feel the need that we've run into problems, we will break this up into a microservices. And last, just a quick diagram from that article, kind of explaining that. So at the top, if we go right, we're going directly to a microservices architecture, and that's risky. So down as we start to follow this chart, a monolithic approach allows us to explore both the complexity of a system and its component boundaries. As complexity starts, we start breaking out some microservices, and then we continue breaking out services as your knowledge of these boundaries and service management increases. So really, just again to kind of reiterate that this is the approach that we want to take to microservices. So you might have a system in your organization today that is a monolithic app, and that you're starting to think about, well, I've heard of microservices. Maybe this is a good candidate for that. And that's the kind of thinking that you want to take. So I hope this lesson kind of cleans some things up as monolithic versus microservices and when to use them. And with that, let's move on to the next lesson.